Kate Milfalcha, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. It's time for our Saturday book, and we are on video number 5 for Final Events by Nick Redfern, which is about the secret government group on demonic UFOs and the afterlife. And I strongly recommend you stick around for the end of this book because there's a twist. This is a really interesting story that poses the question being asked, allegedly, within certain groups inside the military, the Pentagon, the government, and national intelligence. Are ETs demons or UFOs demonic? That's the question. People have made that argument. We are following Nick Redfern's lengthy research into this, and at the end, well, I'm not going to spoil it. Okay, so let's read where we left off, chapter 21, whistleblowing. I need my glasses, but this light, I hope it's okay. Doesn't look too bad. May of 94, Bosch, the guy we've talked about before, called Linda Moulton Howe. Linda Moulton Howe, the wonderful researcher, investigative reporter. Sorry, I forgot to turn off my heater. Who has her own YouTube channel. Of course, I can't remember the name of it now, but it's not hard to find. You just type in her name. 2 Department of Defense agents wanted to read her book, Glimpses of Other Realities, and she agreed. I guess maybe it wasn't all that available, or they didn't want to be seen gaining access to it. She asked them to take the book, read it, write in the margins what they thought was what they knew to be real or false, and suggested this would be a safe way for the Department of Defense to communicate with her without going on the record anywhere. They replied to her through a floppy disk, so they didn't get the hint. A little bit like Dennis Rader, huh? So they advised her to read the book Wholeness and the Implicate Order by David Bohm, B-O-H-M. The Department of Defense was busy exploring his ideas, which are about the interconnectedness of reality and human entity, non-human entities, and national security. His book explains how non-human entities interact with humans. So just for anybody who's interested, the name of that book is Wholeness and the Implicate Order by David Bohm, B-O-H-M. In his book, he argues that contact has already happened and will continue because we are being manipulated and deceived. For instance, he says crop circles are meant to confuse us. Animal mutilations are to make people be distracted and start investigating satanic cults and secret government programs and UFOs so that they're not finding out anything about the actual Department of Defense program. So some of this is non-human entity distraction. Some of it is coming from the Department of Defense. Those things I mentioned, animal mutilation, crop circles, cults, all of this stuff. Some people in the government hierarchy believe that the false ET scenario is propagated by the ETs for their own agenda. They say that the public could not handle the truth. And when written, this is a Department of Defense note that was written. It said that alien abduction was the ultimate diversionary tactic to turn attention away from the real source of non-human entities. So trying to convince people that these entities are from off Earth. This doesn't negate the truth. They're not trying to say there's no such thing as ETs. They're just trying to say that, as well as real ETs, UFO abduction is something separate, a phenomenon that is not extraterrestrial in origin, but is demonic. This is what they're saying. These are not what I believe. I'm not making any statements here. I'm simply telling you what the book said. They're told that Roswell did happen. Bodies were found. Bob Lazar's story of craft and reverse engineering is true, but the origin is not extraterrestrial. These non-human entities are allowing themselves to be involved in mind control weapons development with the government. They're not benevolent and they're not neutral, according to the Department of Defense. And it's not the whole Department of Defense, and it's not everybody within the Department of Defense. It's this core of fundamentalists. Because these two Department of Defense guys who contacted Linda Moulton Howe, they don't think that people could handle any of this. And that's why they approached Ray Bosch, because of his theological training, that he accepts very orthodox Christian thought, and he is an astute researcher. Very important to remember. I think this is an object lesson for each of us. We will approach anything from within our frame of reference, and that's very hard to be careful of that. This way, writing inside the book was a way of providing him with information and still keeping their jobs. Howe's view of ancient civilizations and their contact with non-human entities needs to be considered in a larger picture of the deception of mankind as a whole, according to these agents. That these non-human entities are not human and that they are other dimensional. It makes sense to analyze the false gods of ancient civilization in light of a current deception. So now we've covered Paul Wallace, who has a completely different opinion about this, and I actually asked him about this point of view. You might want to go back to my most recent lengthy conversation with the fabulous writer Paul Wallace of the Eden series, who talks about paleo contact as the origins of human civilization. These guys are saying, well, you could talk about those ancient civilizations, but consider it part of a larger deception. Non-human entities could see the need to create a foundation with twisted facts and make it all kind of foggy because it happened in the past in antiquity. Therefore, they could present themselves as the bringers of all good things to humanity. Jacques Vallée, who wrote Passport to Magonia, which we've also covered in the past, he thought that fairy manifestations and non-human entities were the similar and responsible for current events. Vallée was close to the truth, but according to these guys now, we're talking, this is what they're saying, close to the truth, but the ultimate manipulators of all of us are not human. Once again, this is not my opinion. This is what these subgroups are saying. They approach the author, and he's merely transmitting their message. Stick around for the end. So they offered to answer Howe's questions, but they said that some things can't be discussed. he said, remember that you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free. This is what these DOD guys said to Linda Moulton Howe, because they're coming from this very religious point of view. And the author is trying to be impartial. And he says, okay, so that little quotation, is that to further confuse and muddy the water? According to Baum's book, The Implicate Universe, that one, other levels of reality are only a matter of a shift in relative frequency. Now, this would actually be in concurrence with Hermetic principles, that it's all, they don't use these words because this is from ancient mystery schools, but it's the same thing as the idea of quantum physics, you know, the vibration of molecules, the vibration and the energy, and the faster and more energetic and higher the vibration, the farther apart, the higher the dimension. There's a parallel to all of this. The elite would say, now the elite, not, some people were a little bit confused because I kept using that term elite. We're not talking about the elite like, you know, Queen Elizabeth and Elon Musk. No, we're not talking about a class group. We're talking about the Collins elite, the subset in the Pentagon, who are fundamentalist Christians who are researching ET phenomena from the framework of demonology. And the Collins elite, and I'm going to continue to call them the elite because it's too much of a mouthful. They would say that these levels of reality that you know, are relatively higher frequencies are what determine heaven and hell. So chapter 22, Ancient Knowledge. To understand demonic nature of UFO presence, there's a list which I do not remember. It's been a few weeks since I read this. Let's see here. Oh, okay. So I'm not going to read this whole big long list. It's a whole long list of books to read, having to do with angels, demons, entities, and some of them go very far back, like 1601. These are like seminal works that they're basing their belief system on. One of them, these all agree with the elite theory, right? One of them, written in 1903, called Devils and Evil Spirits of Babylonia, talk about people being plagued by predatory entities. The author, Reginald Thompson, explored Nineveh, which is basically around Mosul in Iraq. And he explored ancient Carchemish, which is Babylon. Carchemish was a battle. I write in shorthand, not real shorthand, my own version of shorthand. Sometimes I get ahead of myself here, but I remember now what I was talking about. So he goes to this place, Nineveh, the site of ancient Nineveh, which is near Mosul, Iraq. And of course, remember 1903 politics, very different. Then he goes to a place called Carchemish, where there was a big battle where the Babylon beat Egypt in this battle. And it's in between Turkey and Syria today. He also talks about Joseph McCabe, a Franciscan monk, who was a monk at the age of 19, became an atheist at the age of 30. And he highlighted the beliefs of Babylonians, which included the fact in their belief that the mental part of man continues after death in some poorly defined fashion. But the dead pass through a dark, dim cave under the earth called Erebu, and the Babylonians dreaded this lower world. Their priests wouldn't even talk about it. They felt the dead would harm the living, malignant spirits, and that gods let devils torment sinners during physical life on earth. You know, the devil made them do it. Many devilish entities are around. Priests organized them into categories and created specific exorcism rites for each category. They lurked in dark places, ruins, groves, the desert. They came out at night to torture people. The worst were the night spirits. There was one called Lilu and his wife Lily too. And they were blamed for all kinds of troubles and ills, and the devil made them do it. They were drawn as half animal, half human. Now, this kind of hybrid image begins to sound familiar. That they were almost as powerful as gods also sounds familiar. They were dangerous to pregnant women and babies. That sounds familiar. Because today the Greys are said to be obsessed with the pregnant or pregnancy and babies. These were also associated with owls, and alien abduction today is associated with seeing owls. Whitley Strieber, whose first encounter was a harbinger of what was to come. It was a large owl. And his own sister has a screen memory of an owl after seeing a light in the sky. Like inexplicable gigantic owls are just around. Redfern, our author here, describes several cases of missing time, alien abduction, and owls. We've gone over them a million times, so I'm not going to belabor it. But they all are considered to be warnings of global catastrophes. Roman mythology tells of the Strix or Striga, usually described as a nocturnal predatory bird of ill omen that viciously fed upon human flesh in vampire-like fashion. Its name is derived from the Greek term for owl. A particularly notable story tells of how one night as a newborn, the legendary King Procus of Alba Longa, you remember him, an ancient city of Latium, this is before Etruscan Italy, which was destroyed by the Romans in the 7th century BC, was savagely attacked by a group of such creatures who callously crept up on him when he was asleep in his cradle. These stories go back very far. So Alba Longa was the very beginnings of Rome. Babylon, Rome, America, all talk about encounters with unearthly creatures. And it's global, but this book mentions these specifically. That they're a threat to babies. They're obsessed with reproduction. They show up in bedrooms at night while people are asleep and subject their victims to near assault. I'm skipping a word because it's sensitive. They're associated with the sightings of owls. So are these stories, thousands of years apart. Are they of the same origin? Do they connect to one another? Are they derived one from the other? Or are they all referring back to something earlier? The work of Dr. Merrill Unger, professor of Old Testament studies at Dallas Theological Seminary, he wrote 40 books, many about demons, and he believed in demonic possession. He said there's clinical evidence that it happens to Christians. It's a carryover from pre-conversion days. It's left over from when they were, I don't know, atheists or sinners or heathens. Such a person blatantly lives in scandalous sin and subscribes to and embraces heresy, engages in occultism, or gives himself to rebellion and lawlessness against God's word. He may expect a demonic invasion in his life. I think what he's saying without saying it is your guilty conscience is at work here. It echoes the fears of those in the Department of Defense who are those who engage in occult operations. It opens portholes for demons to come through disguised as ETs, like Jack Parsons, for example. Dr. Kurt Koch in the 1970s was involved in occult activities. He was involved in studying them. He didn't do them. He was involved in researching the result of them. Get that right. He said they could inevitably lead the participant down an extremely rocky and disastrous path toward mental illness, emotional disturbance, destructive urges, fits of mania. And I think this is just a little aside of my part here. I think this somewhat explains very religious people's fear of, tarot cards and psychics and that sort of thing. They feel it's dangerous. And I think you do have to exercise caution. This is, there are things we don't understand. It depends on setting an intention and protecting yourself and not carrying fear. And a lot of these people are carrying enormous amounts of fear. They're blaming all kinds of things, accidents, psychosis, horrible deathbed scenes on, people dabbling in the occult. And that's where this, I would call it a prejudice, comes from. Then there's John Keel, and if you haven't read his book, I forget the title of it. Maybe it is Mothman, but it's the story, Mothman Prophecies. It's a really interesting book. It's about a UFO witness, and he talks about UFO witnesses in general, about all of the terrible physical problems they have. And he regarded all of this as non-human entity deception. That there's a link between negative occult activity and madness, increased rate of schizophrenia when one ends up paying with one's soul. Then there's one called The Victory Over the Darkness by Neil Anderson, who was an aerospace engineer for NASA and a professor of practical theology. Many have this view that abduction experience has inexplicable causes. There's Dr. Carla Turner, who had knocking, weird sounds, the touch of icy hands, strange marks on the skin. She said those are all common in alien abduction and in demonology, and both are true. There's a long history of deceptive demons, sinister plans to get a human soul, and their most recent disguise in modern times is as ETs. She died of cancer, and there was all sorts of conspiracy talk around her death because she was pretty young. It's been a really long time since I've thought about her or read anything of hers. She was one of the early 80s, 90s experiencer people to come out and really talk about it a lot, and it freaked a lot of people out. Chapter 23, Trojan Horses in the Desert. There's a 2-volume document written March 11th, 1998, called The Collins Report, Deception and UFOs, What We Believe and Why. And it's given to all the Collins elite, and it talks about the UFO presence, and it's deceptive and of occult origins. This report is controversial and disturbing. Because the elite are not officially in the military and the government, they are, but they're not. They can, as a group, can release this report, and it's not classified because they don't exist, and it doesn't violate any national security laws, but it does refer to classified documents, so they are a little bit of a gray area. They have a chapter called The New Mexico Crashes, Trojans, and this sheds new light on Roswell. All things, always, it's like Rome, all roads lead back to Roswell. It assumes an awareness of alien materials, chemicals, biologics being found in 4 different locations between the 3rd and the 13th of July, 1947, outside Roswell. It paints a picture not of crashed UFO and ET bodies. It describes the military getting tangled mass of items and bodily materials, not specifically ET corpses or UFOs. So there's so much information out there, so many different first-person stories. I'm trying to get the author of that book I covered a while back, the secretary who actually flew with the stuff that was found in Roswell to Wright Airfield. And they call it a fall, not a crash. The report lists a big number of published books on military and government reports about Roswell. There is a not commonly known 1971 document called Parsons, von Karnen, and Goddard, A Door Unlocked, a Hoaxing from the Skies, and another called New Mexican Origins, Parsons, Hubbard, and Babylon Workings. It was written in 1988. If these 2 documents are real, they've been kept out of sight of public knowledge and government oversight. I don't think they've gone through a congressional committee. Also, he refers to the May 23rd, 1997 roundtable dinner at the Loftus Boat. Now, I'm throwing this term out here with no explanation because the book does the same thing. He's just, what does that mean? He doesn't know either. You can't look it up because it's not a thing, but it is. These official documents coming out of this report talk about it. It goes on to name acronyms. It's reluctant to share with Science and Tech Department and others. It refers to 1991 whistleblower Ray Bosch and his informants who broke the whistleblower broke his secrecy oath to talk to Bosch to tell him about ominous devilish darkness fast descending on humans. Well, that was 91. I think it's landed. It discusses the difficulty of telling the public and the media. They decided that their best choice is just to do and say nothing. Bury their heads in the sand or continue diversions of crashed UFOs and military spy balloons. Now it's drones. And keep inquiring minds away from the whole concept of demons. Some in 1998 wanted a global revelation, the truth, because they believe that the truth will help our survival. But this all seemed to be a theoretical discussion. It didn't feel like anything was really going to be done. It was more debating back and forth. So Redfern asks, have things heated up since this came out? And it came out 12 years before his book. So 25 years ago, they've been debating this nonsense for that long. I'm not saying that the discussion is nonsense. I'm saying the debate is just going nowhere. Who the whistleblower was who wrote this document is still unknown, at least to us. The document claims that personnel at Wright-Patterson were able to back-engineer fallen materials from New Mexico, 1947, Roswell. Bush's sources, this is the guy who the whistleblower went to, tell him that they weren't alien, they were alchemical from other realms. And no further explanation. I wrote in the margin, WTF. I just, this is very unsatisfying. And I think the author is agreeing with me. The whistleblower referred Bosch to whom he divulged this information. He referred him to the Bible for explanations. So Moshe did, and he concluded that demonic forces can influence the physical world. And this is all based, and I put big stars all around this, because this is based on a literal interpretation of the Bible, a fundamentalist interpretation. The Bible is misinterpreted and reinterpreted a trillion zillion times, depending on the context from which you are looking at it. So it's a caveat. He points to the Nephilim and the fallen angels who interacted physically with the material world, and he doesn't dismiss the possibility that they were spiritual and supernatural. And I'll throw this in. Somebody was asking me about Padre Pio. Now, he was a, oh my God, Capuchin, I think, a Capuchin monk, I think. I know that they have a little couple of room museum to him in their monastery. And he had the stigmata. Now, that's same as stigma, it's actually open wounds on the hands, the feet, and in the side. And they're supposed to be a reappearance of Jesus's wounds from when he was on the cross. And somebody was asking me, well, they're making him a saint, and they say there are miracles, and he's having this stigmata. It's been documented. Well, yeah, it's been documented. But the stigmata are considered in psychological circles to be a conversion reaction. And I guess that would be kind of like, here I don't have any background, so maybe like a fugue state where, like Agatha Christie thought she was somebody else and wandered off for days, or people who have physical manifestations of their religious ardor coming through their psyche. I hope that explains it properly. Ugh. So he doesn't dismiss the possibility that these things could be spiritual and supernatural. The informant shared some stuff about Parsons. Let's get to that. Parsons, he says, was the start of it all. They said it was the genesis of all of this. Was there a doorway that was opened by Parsons to allow these demonic entities in? Or did Parsons give someone else the idea that maybe someone in the government should look into this? That was one of their big concerns, that in order to try and accomplish some sort of military advantage, demonic things masquerading as aliens had been contacted and forces had been unleashed that were not going to be able to be controlled for very long, or at least were not going to be able to be bent to the will of whoever started this project. Satanic rituals, ritual magic, and even human sacrifice were all mentioned as being linked with this project. They were convinced that this had to stop. The conclusions of the elite and Ray Bosch and his informants, the whistleblowers, is that demonic alchemists carefully created the Roswell debris in a far-off realm or an equally far-off world, planted it in the wilds of New Mexico, Trojan horse style, knowing they would be found and interpreted as something of an anomalous, otherworldly nature. More than 50 years later, personnel at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base had achieved some measure of success in conjuring up very similar materials briefly under wildly unpredictable means, and from who knows exactly where, via the door-opening teachings of Jack Parsons. Hence, the Collins elite uses the term the Parsons technique. In other words, these Air Force personnel cited in the Collins report may very well have been the same ones who had foolishly entered into a pact with the forces of Satan to accomplish some sort of military advantage. And just to let you know that there is a ton of documents in this book that I'm not going to go over. They're very dense with military jargon, and I'm just summarizing. That there are those who say the literal ETs crashed at Roswell, and there's a denial of that with the use of the demonic explanation. And all of this debate could be an attempt to spread disinformation to hide the fact that ETs really did crash. Muddy the waters, in other words. So it's just, I love this phrase, it's an unbridled controversy. Amongst other issues, what about allegations of life forms? I've always found that the most interesting. Now we're on chapter 24 called It's Alive. There are allegations that biological material, that would be ET bodies, were at Roswell. And is this a diabolical alchemical thing? Also, did they create the memory metal? If you remember the stories from Roswell of the pieces of metal that looked like aluminum foil, and they could be crushed into a ball. And when you released it from the ball, it spread out into a flat piece of aluminum again with no wrinkles, no bends, no tears. And they couldn't cut it, they couldn't tear it, they couldn't burn it. And the whole story about ETs being found was this brilliant fakery. An associate of Parsons and Goddard, Theodore Van Karman, kind of mentioned him earlier, a physicist in aeronautics and aerodynamics, claimed that one of his distant relatives gave life to a rudimentary inanimate matter. This should sound familiar. In 1930, anti-fascist, anti-Nazi in Hungary, he left to take a job at the Guggenheim Aeronautical Lab at the California Institute of Technology. So he comes from Hungary. And in 1936, he founded the Aerojet company with Parsons and Molina. And this played a significant role in wartime rocketry during World War II. They worked with the U.S. Army Air Force. At the time, the Air Force was part of the Army. After the war, he was the first chairman of the Scientific Advisory Group, they founded NATO's Aerodynamic Research Oversight Group, AGARD, and he belonged to a number of prestigious groups, lots of awards. They're all listed in the book. Let's skip it. He died on a trip to Germany in 1963 and was buried in Pasadena. They brought him back. His whole life, he claimed that an ancestor of his, the Rabbi Judah Loew from Prague, created a golem. That's what I said you might remember. This is a Hebrew folklore about artificial life. In the Bible, it's mentioned as something embryonic and incomplete. It's about animating life from a lump of clay. Does that sound familiar? It should. That's how Adam started out, as a golem made of clay by God in the Bible in Genesis. Golems remain animated because the magic words that are said or inscribed or other rituals that are done. So this story is widely considered to be folklore. The story is that the golem became violent, was de-animated, but the body is still in the synagogue attic, literally in Prague, awaiting reactivation. That's kind of creepy. So the link between the golem, the Rabbi von Karman, I can't say it, Parsons, and extraterrestrial life is ... Interesting. The rumors are that Parsons died trying to create a golem, a homunculus, a tiny artificial man with magic powers. Alchemists believed that the mandrake root grew in the ground where hanged men ejaculated, and its shape is that of like a human. So if you've ever seen a mandrake, if they pull it out of the ground, it's a root, and it has a tendency to split and form two roots. So it's as though you had a carrot or a parsnip or something that were Siamese twin carrots, where they're joined in one spot and then they're separate. So, and there's a reality where you might say those look like legs. And supposedly they scream when you pull them out of the ground. It's picked according to a ritual in order to develop into a human. You don't just yank it out of the ground and it'll come alive. It has to be done properly. Another way to create a homunculus is to inject human semen into a chicken egg, like through the shell into the egg. The elite believed that life was found at Roswell, but that it was alchemical. In other words, created for a reason, by magic. Chapter 25, soul food. The groups and individuals other than the elite, they exist who have come to the same conclusion. Some say that the ETs come for genetic material. Some, like the elite, say that they come for our souls. And then I added this, that Wallace believes that they came because they admire our range of emotions, and they didn't come to harm anybody. But they also came to help humans to establish civilization when there was a near existential event, more than once. In 1956, Howard Menger, a contactee, was told that there were good and bad ETs, that the earth is a battlefield for men's minds and souls. Prayer, good thoughts, and caution are your best insulation. Later, he admitted that the Pentagon asked him to be in an experiment to test public reaction to ET contact. So, what do you believe? What's fact? What's fiction? What's nonsense? What's real? Whitley Strieber in 1988 talked about the abduction phenomenon and souls being at issue. The drones. Okay, I didn't mark what I was going to read, darn it. Oh well. 7 years later, quoted Charles Fort, like Fortean phenomenon. We are barnyard animals, ignorant and here for the slaughter. He was cheerful. John Mack, the famous Dr. John Mack, also linked abduction with the soul. He said some feel that the beings want to take their souls and that they can fool you into handing them over. And remember the story of vampires. Vampires, they want your life force, but you have to invite them in. They can't just show up willy-nilly. Paul Inglesby, in UFOs and the Christian, he said that this is a very ill situation and a devastating spiritual experience. He said he had visions of future atomic war and demonic forces controlling spaceships and nukes, and there was a battle raging for his soul. This is like a vision that he had. And so the question that Nick Redfern asks is, put your brakes on here a second. This is metaphorical. In the 70s, leading English UFO researchers believed in the satanic theory. One Roger Stanway recounts the urge to throw himself onto an electric underground tube, you know, the tube in England, the electric rail. And he had to fight the urge by singing a line from the gospel, saying a line from the gospel. And if you remember, 1973, Tammy Stone had the urge to drive head on. Remember that? And you know, we're not advocating any of this. We're simply discussing YouTube, what psychologists refer to as the call of the void, or the high place phenomenon. Have you ever gone to a really tall thing and looked over and, you know, I don't advise going to very high places, actually. Anyway, these are intrusive thoughts as your brain assesses risk. It's an existential curiosity or your brain misinterpreting survival instincts. It's a sudden awareness of your mortality. It can be called the impact of the perverse. It's a fascination with the taboo. And it sometimes can be related to OCD. Bob Lazar, who claimed in 88 and 89 that he worked at Area 51, that he was shown UFOs and he got access to them and the history of alien presence, and that included an extremely thick document dealing with religion, that humans were containers of souls. Okay. And that religion was created so we don't damage our containers too badly. There's some confusion about which is the container, the body or the soul. Very unique point of view about it. I'm going to stop here because this is just the best place to stop. Bob Lazar's the one, if you recall, when we did his book, he lived in Las Vegas. He would join many other employees of Area 51 every day, getting on a big jet, and they would fly them to work. And it was only the employees of Area 51, and crazy security, just crazy security. And he described working with objects that one was some kind of alien vehicle. And he finally figured it out that there was no engine, there was no transmission, there was no steering. They were like, how did they drive this thing? And he figured out that the cockpit was molded to the bodies of the aliens and their dashboards also. And there was some sort of connection that they were capable of making between their brains telepathically and the body of this UFO, and the material of the UFO responded vibrationally to their telepathic commands. If I remember correctly, it's been a long time, that's what was going on there. And he was supposed to replicate this. Well, the problem is you need people who are capable of doing that. And, you know, it's a bit of a challenge. Okay, we're going to stop here. This is a very good place to stop. And we'll be back with the next chapter. And thank you for watching. I hope you're enjoying this. Slán go fóill. Slán.